Good morning. Welcome to Backchat. I'm Hugh Chiverton. Your co-host today is Mike Rouse. Mike, good morning to you.
Good morning, Hugh.
We're talking today about pardoning Occupy. Yesterday, the leader of the Democratic Party suggested that Carrie Lam pardon all those convicted or facing trial in connection with Occupy Central. That would include the 7 policemen found guilty of assault, the one now facing charges, and the organisers and participants recently arrested for public nuisance offences. While the idea was not popular, some fellow Pandems said it contradicted the rule of law and that the best way forward was for the government to relaunch political reform without condition. The DAB said an amnesty would signal that illegal means were acceptable, while a police officers association said we should let judges decide if acts are right or wrong. Uchiwa himself has retracted his idea. But could it offer a way to heal divisions? With charges emerging years after Occupy, will we ever reach reconciliation? Should the new chief executive try to turn a new page in constitutional development? Drop us an email, backchat@rthk.hk. Go to our Facebook page, that's Backchat on RTHK Radio 3, or give us a call, 233-88266. After 9:20, we're talking about the cost of Dongjiang water. Joining us for our discussion today, we have with us Audrey Yu, barrister, former leader of the Civic Party. Junius Ho will be there in a moment, I think, a practising solicitor and legislator. On the line is Fernando Chung, legislator with the Labour Party, and Lawrence Ma, barrister, chairman of the China-Australia Legal Exchange Foundation. Let's start with an email for a change. This is from Tom. OK, Tom says, what a ludicrous suggestion of pardoning everyone who broke the law during Occupy Central. What, who, when or how should the line be drawn? It's not just the problematic practical steps, but also considerations for the status and process of the legal system in Hong Kong, etc. Furthermore, it would not result in the chief executive or LegCo electoral reforms. It will not have the desired effect for healing any divisions in Hong Kong society while these fundamental issues have not been resolved. Whoever suggested this should have his or her head examined. God help us. That comes from Tom. Little thumbs down, I think, there. Reading between the lines. Audrey Yu, good morning to you.
Hi, good morning.
For joining us today. Do you see any merit in this?
Well, obviously it comes with good intentions. I think Hong Kong people are sort of generally tired after the CY Leung years and want reconciliation, but pardon obviously is not the way forward. And I think to that extent I agree with the email you read out from Tom. You have to resolve the fundamental issues first. I mean, a lot of it is really to do with the political reform that was not successful. And if you don't resolve that and you just say pardon somebody, and I don't know where you draw the line, as Tom says, then it's not really going to resolve anything.
But surely the chances of getting a deal or progress on political reform will be better if the mood was better?
Well, I think it's not really just the mood. You need basic trust, and we've just gone through the CE election in March last month, and a lot of hopes actually were pinned on John Tsang as the sort of unifying force. And of course it turned out that Beijing had different ideas, and Carrie Lam, who was much, much less popular, in fact, got the vote from the election committee. The people's choice actually fell by the wayside. So I think that in itself is not a good start. If you want to put people in the good mood, then the CE election should have had a different result. Then you put people in a good mood. Then you talk about maybe going forward with political reform and all that.
But something similar has been done in many places in the world in the past as a way of starting fresh, starting a new page. In conflicts, in wars in Northern Ireland, in South Africa, and so on. You have this amnesty. In the sense, neither side is happy because both thinks, the other side has done something special, something particularly wrong. But it does offer a fresh approach. It does offer something different.
Well, I think amnesty coming from the government, which is not really popularly elected, and then they still have the power to do everything they want in terms of prosecution and selective prosecution. I mean, if you take, for example, the disqualification proceedings against legislators, that in itself I think, started it, really. And that was even earlier than many of the last wave of prosecutions in relation to Occupy Central. And also, there are different kinds of cases involved in all this. For example, the Kenzang case with the 7 policemen. I think, certainly speaking for myself, and I think a lot of people, it would be wrong to pardon something like that. And it's not really political. In many ways. So it's a very odd sort of mixture, and it doesn't really resolve the critical issue I mentioned earlier of political reform, giving people a choice in choosing the CE and all that. So, pardon is really not
but
a solution.
It is really political, isn't it? The demonstrations were political.
The demonstrations
were political, and we've seen from the timing of the cases brought against the leaders of Occupy Central that it's intimately bound up with the political life of Hong Kong.
Well, I think certainly, if for example, coming from my party, Civic Party, we have a member, Tanya Chan, who's one of the people under the prosecution. She herself was quite firm that pardon is not the way forward, and she said, she would rather trust the courts, and she would, be prepared for all this.
Is this a timing thing? Is this a subject that maybe we could take off the shelf in 6 months' time when the lawsuits are more or less over?
Well, I think that may be a little bit difficult, even more difficult, because I'm certainly concerned about some of the proceedings against the elected legislators. And if the courts come to a ruling, then whichever way it goes, there may be further appeals and so on and so forth. It's very odd then to stop the process and say, well, let's have a pardon or start afresh or whatever. It leaves very bad taste in the mouth, and it doesn't say much about our trust and respect for the rule of law. So I'm not sure it's timing.
All right, Fernando Chung, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. Your reaction to this idea, is there a point to it?
Well, I really agree with Audrey in that it is a very odd timing that 4 of our pan-democratic legislators, elected officials, are now being pursued to be disqualified by the government. And all of a sudden...
That's in relation to the oaths. That's in relation to the oaths that you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But these are elected legislators. And they have gone through, some of them have gone through the swearing-in procedure in a similar manner last time. And I look at the disqualification proceeding as an oppression, as an effort to attack the opposition rather than a friendly gesture. That is quite clear to me. And just having elected an unpopular chief executive for the next term is a slap in the face in Hong Kong people by the central government. All along, the way the government has been handling work in the legislature is by way of rolling us over. The government officials couldn't care less about talking to us, getting our side of the story, our side of the perspective. They count the vote and they proceed. The latest fiasco was the basic infrastructure fund. We asked for only 20-some items out of the 9,000 strong items to be removed from that package so that we can deliberate on those 20-some items which we think are more controversial. The government stood still. They did not move an inch. And they would rather put everybody at risk and rather having everybody come out losers, and still they would be very strong about not even moving a little bit in the procedure. So, and then all of a sudden we talk about reconciliation, restoring trust and all that. Well, it has to come from people who have power. It has to come from people who are in control. And I don't think we have any background, any context to raise any conditions or to even begin to negotiate for any sort of reconciliation.
Right. So, Fernando, you're putting this in this amnesty idea in a full political context.
Yes.
And saying there are so many other things that need to be addressed, maybe or not just first, maybe instead.
Yes.
Okay, also with us, as I mentioned, is Lawrence Ma, a barrister. Mr. Ma, good morning to you.
Good morning, Hugh and Mike.
Well, one sort of constant comment made is that this kind of interferes with the rule of law, but the chief executive has kind of wide powers to pardon people within the law. So would this in any way interfere with the practice, the due process? Do you think if something like this was carried out?
I think 2 points can be made. First, judging from history, these sort of powers would only be exercised on morally compassionate grounds or morally deserving grounds. Like, for example, there was a case in 1884 where there was a shipwreck and there was a cabin boy eaten by two men. The defense of necessity wasn't a defense for murder at that time, and they were sentenced to death. And then I thought it was Queen Victoria has pardoned the two guy. And also, there was also a case in 2001 where two inmates in a jail actually saved the life of the manager of a prison farm when he was attacked and gored by a captive boar. So the prisoner actually saved the life of a prison guard and had their sentence reduced to nil and be pardoned. I mean, it seems, judging from matters previously done, royal pardons were never granted on political grounds. They were granted on morally compassionate grounds.
But around the world, those are very colourful examples. Thank you for those. Around the world, you do get political amnesties. You get Richard Nixon had one, famously, of course, and you get cases, as I mentioned, in South Africa, in Northern Ireland, in Eastern Europe, and so on, where people will say that the past is the past. We're going to draw a line. I mean, there was something similar done with when the ICAC was founded here in Hong Kong. There is a case of not proceeding with prosecutions, but if you the virtue here would be to draw a line and say, right, that was Occupy is over and done with, and now we can start afresh.
Well, on that point, I would have thought that justice has to be done to all of them. I mean, they have to go through the due process of law. I mean, it is really too premature to exercise any pardon just for a political purpose for reconciliation. I don't think that really enhanced the rule of law.
But there is a specific provision, isn't there, in the Basic Law, which gives the chief executive the power to pardon or to commute. So that's in accordance with the rule of law.
Yes, but that doesn't. That is a discretionary power. It doesn't mandate the exercise of a chief executive whenever someone applies for it. And I really doubt whether pardoning these future convicts, for example, would really help to reconcile.
That you've actually brought the word into it. I was about to put into a question. In other places where this has been done, and you has quoted some, a sort of amnesty or a pardon was combined with a truth and reconciliation commission,
which is also kind of part of Wu Chi-wai's idea that there's going to be some kind of independent investigation into the causes of Occupy Central to kind of bring it out in the open.
Because we went off into this bitter cul-de-sac and we ended up all hating each other, even if we stopped throwing things at each other or beating each other. So let's come out of the cul-de-sac. Let's get back into political mainstream and and be nice and start sensible conversations again?
Well, if the ultimate question is the election method of the chief executive, which involves the dismantling, say, for example, the election committee altogether and put it under direct election, which I don't think any democratic countries in this world has a direct election, not Australia, not the UK, not even the US. If you want to do that by fundamentally dismantling that, I don't think it will come to another dead end eventually. Because I don't think
I don't think anybody is talking about dismantling the election committee. I mean, what about enlarging the franchise to the election committee, and so that the electorate is not just 200,000 and choosing 1,200? I mean, that itself is a start.
Oh yeah, because I mean there are calls for a direct election, Audrey, as you know, because we wanted the most popular candidate to be elected. Now, if you're saying that, well, let's do it my way, let's talk about how to expand the spectrum of the electoral committee. Fine.
Well, if we didn't have a dysfunctioning election committee like what we have now, then the 1,200 would not have elected Carrie Lam, who had something like 28% of the popular vote, as opposed to John Tsang, who had more than 50% of the popular vote. I mean, that itself is a ground for discontent. So I don't see how, pardon or amnesty can resolve that.
Okay, now also joining us, our fourth guest today we haven't heard from yet is Junius Ho, a practicing solicitor and legislator. Good morning.
Morning.
What's your take on all this?
I believe the notion of seeking for pardon or commuting of the convicted or people who is likely to be charged in respect of their conduct committed during the Occupy Central event, that is totally uncalled for. And Mr. Wu suddenly sounded this idea. It caught everybody at surprise. And eventually, after several hours, he withdrew it from the public. I mean, the statement that he made, and he apologized for being somewhat, reckless in making the statement. But all in all, talking about the way forward, how to seek for reconciliation, I think seeking pardon or this sort of the proposal wouldn't help. I think the more constructive way to seek for reconciliation across the board in the society is to get everybody to understand each other. It's not just the issue concerning about the direct election of the chief executive or whatever. I do agree that there is a way to improve it. The 31st of August resolution of the MPC, I do not see that being carved at stone. Although it is normally fixed, it wouldn't be changed until some cogent reasons to be spelled out. I'm still hopeful that that can be improved. The election committee itself is somewhat unchangeable, but how to increase or enlarge the composition, that is open for discussion. That's one point. Now, secondly, I'm also very happy to see that there's a gesture and somewhat changing in terms of the attitude from my friends, colleagues in the pandemic camp. They agree to go up to the north and to inspect the water supply system along the East River, and that is a good sign. I think seeing is believing. We should not just confine ourselves in a world that is with a very narrow vision. We should broaden our horizon as much as possible and see the changes within on the mainland. I think the more of this sort of the activities and events that should be organized in order to make each other understand, the world, how it functions better, not just Hong Kong from the Hong Kong perspective, but also from the mainland and even from the worldwide.
Wouldn't it be a good idea then for the mainland to restore everyone's home return permit.
Yeah, I would advocate that. I was happy to see, long hair, Chang Mo, could be granted with the permits to return to the mainland. And he was also making the remark that he was very happy to be there, being a Chinese, and such rights should not be deprived. I totally agree with that one. But of course, on that note, we need to show one thing. Mutual respect is very important. Everybody is entitled to have his own view, but it's not the world to say that if you're not following my way, and it will be highway. No, that is not the way that we run the world.
Right. In fairness to Mr. Wu Chi-wai, he was not the first person to call for an amnesty, was he?
No.
The police, unions and so on called immediately after the verdict for the 7 policemen.
I don't think the police union did that. Somebody akin to that sort of the group or interest group or concerned group, but it was immediately dismissed. I mean, such idea could not be... was not considered to be good at all.
Well, of course, in this particular case, they're still appealing, so the machinery hasn't finished. So,
exactly.
Yeah. What would happen if they were successful in their appeal? They'd have been pardoned for no reason.
I mean, you have this case. You have the other cases relating to, as was mentioned, the charges over the oaths and so on. You have the flag case. You have these charges against legislators and others in connection with Occupy Central. We got the case against the original localists, and you've got all the by-elections which are going to follow from this. This is going to go on for years and years and years, isn't it? Wouldn't it be useful, don't you think? I mean, to do something different, to try and think outside the box, to try and stop this. Otherwise, we're just going to go further and further spiralling down, aren't we?
Well, I do not rule out any possibility, but I've made my position quite clear that it's not a good idea to think of this at the moment. In fact, what I was trying to do while I was on my feet in electrical, I urged that all this sort of the thing should be clear up and pursued or completed ASAP without delay. Because we have already passed 2 years, the second anniversary of the Occupy Central, and only about 200 odd cases were pursued or prosecuted out of 1,000. In terms of the figures, statistic is totally appalling, unsatisfactorily. In terms of the efficiency of the carrying out the justice implementation of all this sort of thing is unacceptable. So I held the official responsible for such delay.
You think there should be more prosecutions?
I think so. Well, it's not
the opposite
more
of an amnesty.
Well, that's why I said, I'm not really in favor of amnesty at this moment. What it should be done, it should be done long time ago, rather than being dragged on for years until somebody sound this sort of the brilliant idea to say that, well, why not? We just pardon it. I don't think that is acceptable at all to me. Well, but at the same time, I do not rule out that there might be possibility in time to come. I don't know, but at this moment, I haven't seen any cogent reason or justification in invoking the Article 48, sub-Article 12.
Is there a danger here with this long delay, and you've drawn attention to it yourself,
yes,
that this constitutes abuse of process, and that one legal argument is that the case shouldn't be allowed to go forward? And people who confessed, who walked into a police station 2 years ago and said, "Here I am, arrest me," were sent away, and then suddenly 2 years later they're told, "Oh, right, you've got to report. We got hours before we couldn't charge you, so come in now. We're going to arrest you."
Yes, it runs such a danger. In fact, a similar kind of argument had been raised by 4 electrical members when they were prosecuted on the oath incident. They said, but on a different reason. They said, why would we just select it for prosecution? It would be unfair. So therefore, they asked for stay. And in fact, Audrey was representing one of them.
I think, Junius, you got it wrong. The 4 legislators did not ask for a stay because of the delay. They asked for a stay because of the selective
prosecution. I said, different reason. That's why.
Well, it's a different different reason. It's not delay. But the fact is, I think Fernando mentioned it earlier, that with this oath-taking, in fact, similar things were done over the years, and also with this particular LegCo in 2016 on 12th of October, 70 legislators were sworn in, and there were many who said things before the oath-taking and after the oath-taking. And during the argument before Thomas Au, the government's case was that when you take an oath, you cannot have another message other than the oath. And any extra message, however good it is, however laudable it is, whether it be made before or during or after the oath-taking, then that voids
we're gonna have
the
to
oath.
Press pause as we break for the news at 9 o'clock. More in a few minutes' time. We say goodbye to Fernando Chung for the moment. The weather, 26 degrees at the moment, humidity 80%. Back in 3 minutes.
Including possible policies, especially in developed countries, that could restrict international trade. You're listening to the news on RTHK.
Welcome back. Backchat on a Wednesday morning with Mike Rouse and me, Hugh Chiverton. We're talking about that suggestion to pardon Occupy Central activists. We're talking about that issue and issues around it later. We're going to be talking about that debate over the cost of Dongjiang water and the recent trip by legislators, including Democratic legislators. We have with us now Lawrence Ma, as a barrister, chairman of the China-Australia Legal Exchange Foundation. Audrey Yu, barrister and former leader of the Civic Party, and legislator and solicitor Junius Ho. Our email is backchat@rthk.hk. You can comment on our Facebook page as well. That's Backchat on RTHK Radio 3, or give us a call. Join the conversation. 233-88266 is the number, 233-88266. Let's see. A comment from Jalal, who says, there's a couple of points actually. First of all, he says, Lawrence Ma is so full of nonsense. He's happy to point to England for use of pardons, but not for our demands for a full parliamentary democracy. Jalal also says, should the DPP have prosecuted the Occupy ringleaders when so many people supported the protests? Estimates were that 2 million people participated. This changes the nature of the nuisance. Surely it is not a nuisance when most of the public support it. Question mark. Lawrence Ma, I don't know if you want to come back on the your citing of examples in England. But what about the question of, who you actually prosecute when it comes to Occupy Central? Why some people and not others? I don't know if millions, but certainly hundreds of thousands of people walked on the streets and, trespassed or whatever. Well, I saw Audrey Yu there herself. You
don't know. I mean, I may be the next one to be prosecuted. I may be next in line.
Is that any way to run a prosecution service?
Look, I'm not the DPP. I mean, I can only answer it from the angle of a lawyer. I mean, I think there would be more to be prosecuted. I think the first few were prosecuted for conspiracy and inciting public nuisance. There are more to be prosecuted for participation in public nuisance. We can't say how long the list is because I don't have the information.
Didn't the police take about 1,000 names or something?
That's what Junius Ho was mentioning earlier.
Yeah, but it's also a matter of evidence, isn't it? I mean, you got to actually take... in criminal laws, you know that the crime has to prove beyond reasonable doubt.
How about a camera, then, a film, which we all saw for weeks and weeks?
Everybody has... not every police has a on-body camera in those days.
I was thinking the news crews.
And then you got to rely on news reports. Now, how accurate can they be, and how whether there are any doubts in it, I don't know. I haven't assessed the evidence. But of course, because there's so many people involved, you got to take. It takes time to go through the evidence and to diagnose a case to see whether it is prosecutable. If there isn't a good case, you just have to abandon it because public funds are involved. You just can't prosecute people just for the sake of doing it.
Yes, and you run the risk as well that someone who went along just to see what was happening is filmed by a film crew Now, is that person participating in Occupy?
Exactly. That's why you got to spot that person who has been in that position or in various positions during a repeated period of time, and the action that he or she has taken. All sorts of things you could take into account before you decide.
I'm just rehearsing my own defence, because I did go down to have a look and see what was happening.
You're being sarcastic, Mike.
It's been known.
You didn't go, I as far as I'm aware.
I did go to look, yes.
You did go to look, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, because I was fascinated by so many... I wanted to see the lessons being run by people so that students were actually studying there. And I formed the distinct impression that some of them were studying harder in the street than they did in the library at the university.
Just drawing back to the commentator's email, I'm sort of trying to understand what he's trying to say, because, I mean, the royal pardons in the UK was granted on compassionate ground. I mean, research shows that they're all granted on compassionate grounds, as far as I'm aware. There are some pardons being granted in Thailand, for example, on the birthday of the Thai king, pardoning some 60 prisoners. Some of them are Australian pedophiles. But other than an occasional pardon, many of the pardons that have been granted before were on more compassionate grounds.
Right. I mean, there's a difference, isn't there, between criminal cases, which are pardoned, and you've talked about the sort of justification there, but the political wiping the board clean is a different ball game.
Haven't seen one done though.
There was one in Northern Ireland, in respect of Northern Ireland. There was one in South Africa as part of the reconciliation. It wasn't just Nelson Mandela wearing a Springbok shirt and so on, although that was a very, very significant gesture, because rugby at the time was seen as a white sport. And the idea that the black president was saying, no, they're South Africans too.
I think, Mike, there are a couple of problems here. One, of course, is the long delay. There's no explanation for the long delay. Secondly, it's a selective targeting. And I was giving the example of the 4 legislators during the oath-taking, that so many people had done the same thing. And even during the same sort of swearing in last time in October, but the government just targeted a few. And then there's also the question of very odd charges. I think one of the reasons why it took them so long to prosecute the Occupy trio was that they had to come up with very odd charges. They were
public nuisance.
Not just that. They were charged with inciting to incite somebody to incite for public nuisance. It's a very, very odd charge, and it's a maximum of 7 years because it's a common law offence instead of unlawful assembly or whatever, which is a much minor matter. And so I think that probably explains the delay. They have to come up with these exotic and difficult charges.
But isn't there a legal principle that if you break the law, you should do so in a way that the law clearly recognises? Otherwise, you bring this kind of exotic charge upon yourself.
Well, I think certainly, for example, for the Occupy trio, they said they were prepared to plead guilty, but then they were thinking of the sort of usual, normal charges, not the charge that you are guilty of inciting somebody to incite somebody else to commit a public nuisance and all that. So I think, it just explains that the government's attitude is trying to make life difficult for everybody, and that's really totally against the spirit of a pardon or an amnesty.
Okay, on our Facebook page, Henry says the suggestion has been withdrawn. I think the suggestion is a blatant violation of the rule of law and principle of justice. Those convicted or facing trial in connection with Occupy Central have broken the law, and there is nothing that warrants their pardon by the Chief Executive. Also, consideration on arresting others are still in progress. The benefit of this suggestion to the Pandems is OC-relevant people are exempted from the law. This is total rubbish and shows how hypocritical and selfish the Pandems are. In the hypothetical case where pardon is made, the Pandems would continue their opposition because their existence depends on opposing the government. And Justin says no amnesty, but one for Donald Jung should be considered. That's another.
But he didn't occupy it.
No,
I must have missed that.
I didn't. No, that's another can of worms. What about that? But I mean, Junior, so when it comes to deciding who you prosecute, this is the issue of the charges. Yeah, and these are unusual charges. But also, the question Jalal's point about so many people, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people participated in this. Are you going to prosecute them all? And if not, how do you justify who you choose and who you don't?
I wouldn't believe, and I couldn't imagine that if the Secretary for Justice or the Department of Justice would prosecute over tens of thousands of them, just simply because of their showing the presence there. No, I don't think so. There is, I'm sure there is a clear guideline for prosecution. We're not talking about, in this case, in this situation here in Hong Kong, there's a widespread or unnecessarily excessive prosecution at the moment, but rather on the contrary. In fact, it has been. The Department of Justice has been dormant and being seen as lack of action for 2 years until recently. Then only 9 out of the 40-something targeted core members who were instrumental to the entire OC event will prosecute. So it's not the case. Rather, I think we're just talking about a handful being prosecuted. In fact, if you look at the figure, the statistic, which shows how humble and how conservative the Department of Justice has been in terms of proceeding with all these sort of the charges. So I think they have been over cautious rather than being unreasonably, being ridiculously, even taking Mike to the court for the simple reason that I have on such a day seen Mike, showing his face or presence at a particular spot in Wan Chai or Admiralty. No, I don't have to worry.
I'm not going to say where it was because that's one of the elements of the charge, isn't it? This, in fact, to an extent, strengthens the government's position that we haven't charged 100,000 people.
No.
We've gone for the dozen or so who played a leading role. In
fact, it's the government's case that, they have been very, very cautious in proceeding with all these sort of cases. And they had to review all the video clippings and pictures, considering every tiny little bit. And that's exactly the point I said, that's ridiculous too. You're being too over meticulous.
Okay, this is a comment from Bowen. Thank you, Bowen. He says, Dear Backchat, pardoning all concerned at this stage, even if it's legally possible, will only paper over the cracks in our society, not heal the rift. Another possibility is that the Chief Executive will eventually selectively pardon or commute the sentences of only some involved, particularly those in the police. If that happens, it will only deepen and widen the rift, not heal it. Maybe Mr. Wu Chi-wai's real calculation is that a great many more in his camp will be prosecuted as opposed to those in other camps, and some members of the judiciary may be tempted to pass sentences more severe than the facts justify to satisfy the wishes of the authorities. If that's the case, Mr. Wu need not be bothered by such considerations. Granted that the more extreme members of the pro-establishment camp can be counted upon to seek to exert pressure openly on the judiciary and to speak abusively of it if the judicial outcome proves to be different from what they wish it to be. For if the quality of certain individual judges is so poor that those fears do come true, it will be to the benefit of our society to be able to see and identify those individuals, in addition to having any unjust verdicts rectified on appeal, of course. That is one of the benefits of an open and transparent judicial system. Maybe it's time for everybody, including both the members of the pro-democracy camp who took part in the Occupy movement and the judges, to be tested. Further, Mr. Wu's suggestion that a special commission should be set up, among other things, to recommend to the CE the pardoning of people, including pan-democrats who participate in the Occupy movement, is unrealistic, as that is so unlikely to be acceptable to the authorities as to amount to dreaming in the worst sense of the word. That thought comes from Bowen. Thank you very much indeed for that. Audrey, are you satisfied that the legal process is working fairly when it comes to the police, when it comes to the way that these charges are being dealt with in connection with Occupy?
I think you can only speak of the judicial process as a whole, because, of course, if you look at individual cases, there are always individual cases that you or I would not agree with, and that's part of life. But I think on the whole, the Hong Kong people would have to trust the judicial process. And one problem about this pardon or amnesty suggestion is that you really wouldn't know where to draw the line and how to include or exclude people. And there will be bound to be more arguments than agreement as to where to draw the line. So that's not practical anyway. And also I agree with Bowen that, it's one-sided dreaming, because it's not going to happen. I mean, particularly, as I said, after the last election, we should know that the government is going to take a very hard-line approach, and there is no indication that that anywhere is pardon. I mean,
but was that C.Y. Leung's government? Was that C.Y. Leung's government taking that hard line?
I think the first thing, let's come back to just very plain and simple reality. Carrie Lam is now the CE in waiting. And the first thing she ought to do is to try to meet, every party, every legislator, and so on. And she has so far as I know, refused to meet. For example, with people like Professor Edward Youde, Nathan Law, Long Hair, and in short, those legislators who are now under the target of the government in being in the process of being disqualified. And Carrie Lam, as far as I know, has not made any appointment to see them. Now, so even before we begin to talk about pardon, I think, let's let the new government or the government in waiting meet all these 70 legislators, just different groups. Just ask Carrie Lam. I mean, when she's going to meet with Edward Youde and Nathan Law and Lau Siu Lai and Long Hair. I mean, if she doesn't even consent to do that, then, where do you begin to talk about pardon?
But isn't there a danger if she moves too publicly and too dramatically in too many areas? This is actually acting as CE before she's taken up the job.
No, but she is already making an appointment to meet different groups. For example, she is asked to meet with the Civic Party. I know that for a fact. And I know she's also asked to meet some of the independent legislators. What about Demosisto? That's,
right.
A party that has a legislator in Lechco. Is she meeting with them or not?
Your point is that it's the selectiveness of it.
If the government wants to reconcile and make peace with everybody, the first thing she has to do is to real connect. I think, wasn't that her slogan? We connect?
I beg to disagree on this, Audrey. Number one, whether or not Carrie is having the sincere intention to reconciliate, I think is still remain to be seen. But she should not be just judged upon the point that if she hasn't really made the appointment to see the four guys who have been who are subject to the proceeding at this moment, is a sign that she hasn't got the intention to reconcile. I think that is a little bit far-fetched. Probably, I don't know, the reason why she doesn't see it appropriate at the moment to see the four. Because she doesn't want to jeopardize the proceeding, and secondly, she doesn't want to embarrass the.
Why should it jeopardize the proceedings? I mean, they are legislators until such time as the law says they are not.
In fact, there are so many things to do. Perhaps that may not be seen as the top priority.
Yeah, I see. She's too busy.
The government, if she's representing the government already taken a stance that these four legislators are to be disqualified. So that it is the government's stance not to recognize them. So if she as the head of government, should have taken the same stance as the secretary.
You remember that was what John Tsang did when he was financial secretary. He refused to answer questions from one of them, and yes. There was a huge row in Lechco. And then Carrie Lam promptly came out and said, "Oh no, no, that's not the government policy. And John Tsang said, well, I took legal advice. I was told by Rimsky that the government was not supposed to deal with these four legislators. And of course, that's wrong. And Lawrence, of all people, you as a lawyer should know that. There was no injunction to say that these people can't act as legislators. Sure. They are legislators at the moment.
They are still, yes.
But surely, in fairness, if the conversation is, it's nice to meet you, Mrs. Yao. By the way, can you stop this prosecution? Is obviously going to be the first question, isn't it? Or she said, well, it's very nice to meet you, but you might not be in the job much longer.
These people were properly returned through open, fair elections. To me, I just find it, even as a lawyer, I just find it so difficult to accept that, these legislators, having gone through a fair election, were properly returned, and they took the oath like everybody else. And yes, they had extra messages during their oath, but everybody else did.
The president of
LegCo... not everybody else, but many legislators did, and they've been doing it for years.
The president accepted their oaths.
That's right. And then the government then takes these judicial proceedings, take them to court and say that they should be legally declared disqualified. I mean, as I said, even as a lawyer, I find it, quite tough.
Is the prosecution case that the president was wrong in admitting the oath?
The government's case is that the president got it wrong. The president is one of the defendants to be sued.
The Secretary General, got it wrong. That's why it triggered the entire
the Secretary General was not one of the defendants, but the president of LegCo and is.
Junius Ho, were you given an amnesty over this selfie that you took?
No, it was not an amnesty as such. You got it wrong.
A pardon, maybe? A waiver, maybe?
No, not at all. In fact, that's a very interesting case, and public has some of the public, not all, I must emphasize, consider that, as soon as a person who took a photo in the place where I was sitting is a crime. No, that's not the case. I did what I believe.
I must say, Junius, a lot of people did what they believe, but I happen to disagree with you on this issue, and I find the government's response to that very, very odd, because the government says this law is only targeted against people who were taking photographs of victims or sort of defendants or whatever. And I find it so
I just give you a very clear...
Because it's difficult to legislate and to police.
A clear example, if you hold me responsible for taking photo inside the court, all right, okay, that's fine, but that's not inside the courtroom.
You were in the lobby. You were in the lobby area.
Yeah, the lobby area. Yeah. Well, how could you draw the distinction between those journalists who took photo of the accused or the parties of proceeding coming in and out of the court building, and in fact they were just under the canopy of the building, and that's also considered to be within and part of the court building. Now, if I was wrong, then they were all wrong too, and they are still doing it wrong now. So therefore, the truth of the gist of the offence itself is that you should not tamper with the justice by embarrassing the proceeding and taking photo of the witness, lawyers, judges, all this sort of thing. What's happening inside the court? In fact, I was just sitting outside the court. It was the lobby. Secondly, ceremonial stuff, activities were also
Junius, you know that the lobby area is prohibited for photo
No, there was no sign, being posted up the stick up,
You need a sign to tell you.
I tell you, this is
what should be done away. Look,
yeah.
In America, you got Judge Judy on TV.
You ask that law to be changed. You don't take a selfie and
now you pinpoint me for breaking the law as such. Then how about you sit in the area where it's declared to be restricted area, should be clear. And
you never know. I may be prosecuted next. Well, that's what I said.
You see, if you're laughing at me or holding me responsible for that one, you're even at a more serious situation.
I am just saying that I don't agree with the government's decision, saying that it's all right for you to take a selfie there in the lobby of the court because you were not taking a picture of a witness. I mean, if once you fudge that distinction, then everybody who take out a camera can say, oh well. Okay, I'm only going to take a picture of my friend, not a defendant.
Isn't that a common law charge?
It's very difficult.
I mean, there's outdated common law charges in it. It's not a statutory offence, is it?
Well, it's a contempt of court.
Yeah, so it's a common law thing. So, I mean, yeah.
Okay, well, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much indeed to Lawrence Ma, to Junius Ho, and Audrey Yu. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us today.